late. Sorry. I'm late for being late. I said I was going to be late, and now I was later than the late. We're finishing up Mark chapter 4. So, Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it says, "On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side.' Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was. Okay. And other little boats were also with him." Okay, a little boating trip. "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?' And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, 'Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So, firstly, just a little note. Isn't it fascinating? You know, it's like I've taught the book of Mark. I've read these before, but sometimes you read a verse and like something hits you like you've never read it before. And it just here the other little boats were also with him. And it's kind of funny. It's like, I don't know, I forgot about that. And probably, right, we've watched movies, we've watched The Chosen, we've seen stuff or whatever, and they never portray other boats in the area. But it sounds like there was a group of boats going along. Now, Jesus is asleep. His head's on a pillow. I always like to just imagine that Jesus carried a pillow with him everywhere he went. But typically the stern, the rear of the boat, where the guy with the rudder was, there'd be a pillow that he could sit on because he's kind of sitting there with the rudder the whole time. So something for him to kneel on where everyone else could be up on actual chairs, right? He's down lower. And so Jesus is there in the back, asleep on that pillow. And this wind, this storm comes. Now, this is Storms 101. Later, they're going to have to face a storm without Jesus in the boat. A little more difficult of a test because Jesus isn't with them. And notice what they say. "Don't you care? Don't you care that we're perishing?" And I know that I'm not the only one who has told God or asked God, "Don't you care?" But that's how we feel sometimes. Like things are going on in our lives that are overwhelming and frustrating. And it's like, don't you care, God, about what I'm going through? And so I try not to use, my wife, my kids, my family as the example for every story. But at the same time, the reality is my kids aren't perfect, and sometimes they're frustrating, and sometimes they're aggravating, and dealing with children can be difficult. And sometimes even my wife is frustrating. She's an angel, so obviously it's just me having an issue. But reality is that all of us, I think all normal human beings, we sometimes have problems with kids. We sometimes have problems in marriage. We have problems at work. We have problems with addiction, problems with temptation, problems with the flesh. And sometimes when we're struggling with one of these things, because no temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man, 1 Corinthians 10:13, right? It's stuff that's common. We struggle with common things. We share these struggles with one another because they're in common with one another. And so we're struggling with these things and we ask God, "Don't you care?" Because obviously when we're having these struggles, we're in the right, and obviously it's just my kids that are the problem, or it's my wife that is the problem, or it's all these sinful temptations that are the problem. Why is God not protecting me from the enemy's attacks? Why is God not stopping the storm? And so, because of a full moon, the aligning of the planets, Satan, and 20 other reasons, I had a disagreement with my wife. And I was frustrated. And I was angry. And I'm like a fixer, right? I was a shop teacher. I fix things. But I couldn't fix her. Note to husbands, your wife isn't something that needs fixing. But that mentality is tempting at times. And I was really frustrated. And a lot of it was just she was stressed out because of all the things that were going on. And she was overwhelmed, and she's responding as almost all women do when they're feeling overwhelmed and just too many things going on. And of course, I'm just looking for a fix, but I couldn't fix it. And so it's very frustrating for me when I can't fix a problem. And so, let's see here, back up a chapter here. And I went to a pastor's conference. So I left. I left our home with these frustrations kind of just brewing. And I was teaching Luke on Sundays. And so I was going to teach this story. Jesus asleep in the boat. Don't you care? And here I'm going away trying to study for a Sunday message, and I'm frustrated with what's going on in my life, feeling like, where's God at? And what, don't you care about all this stuff that's going on? And at this pastor's conference, they decided to go through the book of 1 Peter. And pastor from Bozeman, Ted Etheridge, awesome brother. Love that guy. He just always is so encouraging for me. And he's speaking on marriage, 1 Peter 3. He gets the 3rd chapter. And he refers back to Proverbs 27. And it says verse 15 and 16. It says, a continual dripping on a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. And I'm just hearing them, amen. I'm just, and it says, whoever restrains her can restrain the wind and grasp oil with his right hand. Well, and that's it. You can't just grasp oil. It just squirts everywhere. And you can't fight the wind. And I felt like this sinking feeling because it's like, yeah, I can't restrain my wife. I can't fix because she was hurting and she was upset. Where's God? Don't you care? And then God, of course, or not God, Ted, close but not the same. Even the wind and the rain, they obey him. The wind and the waves. And so there you have, even the wind obeys him. And there's that connection. And for me, it hit me like a wrecking ball because of the fact that that was my Sunday text. So he took his text, and then sends us to the Proverbs. And it's like, man, yeah. Who can restrain a woman like that, man? You can restrain the wind if you can. It's like, yeah. And what it was, this is the gospel. You see, that he took me to a place to realize I have no power. I have no ability to save myself. I have no ability within me. And when you're an able-bodied person, I'm a fairly able person. I can do a lot of stuff. And so it's all the more helpful when you're brought low to a place where you realize I'm helpless. I can't fix the problems with my kids. I can't fix the problems in my marriage. I can't fix the problems with my own shortcomings and failings. If I could do that, I could restrain the wind. I could grasp oil with my right hand. But even the wind obeys him. And so it did. It hit me like a ton of bricks because it is that reminder that Jesus can fix all those things that you can't. And so that's the idea of the gospel being interwoven into all this, and that it's not just the gospel that saves, but it's the gospel that sanctifies. Sometimes people feel like you get the gospel and then you move on to other stuff, and it's like, well, no, it's the same gospel. It's the same working of grace that also purifies us, cleanses us, strengthens us, and encourages us. You know, the foolish Galatians, having begun in the Spirit, are you going to be made perfect in the flesh? And I can be guilty of that at times, where you try and, you know, I'm saved by Jesus, but then I'm fixed by Joe. And it's like, no. And so knowing that your marriage, your kids, your walk, your purity and your holiness, all of these things, it really falls back onto the gospel, this message that I am unable, but God is able. And if I keep that mentality of being helpless, but having a great helper, one of the names of the Holy Spirit, the Paracletes, is the name given by Jesus there in John's Gospel. Well, he can handle my problems. And so, yeah, if you're from my church, then you're familiar with the song, Even the Wind. And as Enrique mentioned, I've shared this story before as I sing that song. That is probably one of the nearest and dearest of all the songs that I sing and have written. And it is because it was I wrote it. I came home from that pastors conference and I sat down and I wrote the whole song pretty much just in one afternoon, or not even an afternoon. It was pretty quick because that song was just taking me through my own thoughts. You know, how it's so hard when you don't know what God's trying to do, when you don't see what God is trying to accomplish. But you just have to hand all those things over to Jesus and just trust. Even the wind and the waves, they obey him. So me, who has no power over the wind and the waves, but I'm struggling in a storm, well, I can hand it over to him. Teresa says she wants to hear the song. So we do have it on YouTube, and we have it on our church app. I will post the YouTube link in the comments as soon as I log off. That way you guys can listen to the song if you want to hear it. I think we've got the more recent recording. I don't know which recording it is, but just our worship team at church doing it. So we've got it. I thought about getting my guitar out, but we've got a good recording from church. But yeah. And so that's the idea, is that life can hit you with storms. And this is Storm 101. They're learning the lesson with Jesus in the boat, right? There'll be another storm, and Jesus won't be in the boat. And God does that with us. As we do grow and learn to trust him, he kind of removes himself from the situation to where we have to trust him without him asleep in the boat. Now we have to trust him, but it's still the same thing. It's the same Jesus calming the storm, but he's letting us learn how to walk on our own 2 feet while trusting him. So there you guys go. A great little story. Yeah. I'll post that song. God bless you guys. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Go to church. You need to. I'll see you guys next week. Bye. Oh yeah, and go back and listen to the beginning if you missed this. It was a good little message.